Welcome back to the Mountain Morning Show, and I am so pleased to have Dr. T.V. Paul on the show, who is here speaking on behalf of the Utah Council for Citizen Diplomacy. The book is The Warrior State, Pakistan in the Contemporary World, which is a compelling title. But there's a very specific reason why you chose this, and that is that you believe that Pakistan would have been in much better shape had they looked at what some of the other developing countries were doing and tried to feed off of the side of making money and being part of the world, as opposed to being a little more traditional as they've been. Is that right?
Yes, thank you for having me. And
thank you for being here.
The fundamental argument is the same, that Pakistan had the opportunity to become a Korea or a Taiwan.
Right.
In fact, it was weaker than Korea. I mean, it was stronger than Korea.
Indeed.
Early 1950s and early 60s, and then Korea and Taiwan took off because they also faced big enemies. The question is, why didn't they pursue the kind of trading strategy,
an economic developmental
strategy. Instead, they pursued what you call a pure national security strategy. And I think that's a big mistake that they did. Of course, for a period of time under Ayub Khan during the 60s, they had a good growth rate. But since then, it has been a slide. And that slide is due to the strategies they pursued, playing kind of geopolitical games, or what I call it, and that causing a geostrategic curse, as I discuss in this book, similar to a resource curse. If you get too much resource or too much foreign aid, the elite may not do much development internally.
Yeah, well, there's no need at that point. That's the
they can
typical
survive
reason,
with
right? Well, this is an interesting take on this, certainly, because obviously people in this country would argue entirely the opposite direction, because that is what they have been brought up to believe. They believe that, as you said, the warrior state is, or in a garrison state, is something that is very typical of their history and, of course, their theology.
Yeah, but that the U.S. is not completely off the hook in this.
Indeed, we aren't.
Because the U.S. often it is short-term interests. First time it was the Cold War alignment, so Dulles and Eisenhower, they thought Pakistan would be a good ally, without really encouraging them to modernize, which is a big problem. Whereas they did that with Korea and Taiwan.
Yeah, weaponizing instead of modernizing is a problem.
Giving a lot of weapons. And then in the during the Zia-ul Haq's time, the first Afghan conflict, the U.S. again provided military and economic assistance and encouraged actually the Talibanization of Pakistan. Indeed. By using some of those elements to fight Mujahideen. At that time they were not known as Taliban, to fight the Soviet forces.
Yeah, we were in the position of, we thought that the Soviet communist scourge was going to take over, and our thought at that point was, how do we stop this?
Yes, and
regardless of the longer-term consequences.
Right, but once that was done, and then the Soviets withdrew, U.S. pulled out without really leaving any kind of footprint there, and so Pakistani elite then supported the Taliban to win the war in civil war in Afghanistan. In '96 they won.
Right.
And that really affected Pakistan negatively, although tactically it was a victory, but it really Talibanized Pakistan too. So since then you have the 9/11, and post 9/11 Pakistan again becomes a geostrategic player. And even during that period, one would have expected trade and investment getting more attention. But unfortunately, even then, most of the attention was focused on economic aid or military aid in return for services like providing the road transportation, facilitation, etc. And
of course, turning over members of the Taliban, things
not
like
all.
that. Not all.
Yes.
Which is, it brings us to some compelling questions. As the United States pulls out of Afghanistan, and as it leaves what to many people in that region believe to be a puppet leader, although he's sort of proven himself, or at least he's trying to separate himself right now. It brings into question the security of these two nations next to each other, of course, and the possibility that the Taliban will reinstate itself. What do you think of this situation?
The Taliban definitely will have a larger control of many parts of Afghanistan and Pakistan, border regions of Pakistan. That's the Pakistan and Taliban is separate, although they may be linked. But the Afghan government may survive, kind of the Somalia situation, where the central government has control over the capital in some areas, and occasionally they go into the southern regions especially. But the problem is how deeply Pakistan will be supporting the Taliban to take over.
Right.
There are some signs that Pakistan may not do exactly what it did in the 90s and may not allow Taliban to win for its own reasons. But there are elements in the Pakistani military, and ISI and all would still want to be a player in Afghanistan. So this is going to be an interesting period, how these countries can come together and try to make sure Afghanistan does not slide into the same old pattern. Afghanistan's degeneration or decline will affect them all their
Right.
security and development. So it is in the interest of the regional states, the elite, including the Pakistanis, to come together and decide that Afghanistan should become a normal state, and we should not help any of the forces that are making it a destabilized country.
Indeed. All right, this brings up obviously a couple of things. So Pakistan, of course, having to deal with Afghanistan, one thing. Of course, they also have to deal with
Homegrown.
they've got their own internal problems, certainly. What would it take for the Pakistan government to look at an economic development plan? What does it take the U.S. reaching out to them, or is that not? Is that maybe a little too forward of us, or is it really something that has to come from them first?
I think it has to come from them. They need a grand strategy, a developmental strategy that will open up their economy, at least pockets of it. So I have been encouraging them, why don't you start 200 engineering colleges straight away? They don't put any training in science and technology sufficient enough to produce that workforce.
Right.
Why don't you create maybe 30 special economic zones and allow protection, give them protection, and then bring in the Chinese companies, different companies.
Indeed.
Why don't they have trade between the border states of India, like Punjab, the two Punjab? There are quite a bit of companies very interested in that. They should create joint ventures and do things in such a way that an economic push rather than the security all the time,
Is it a very intriguing point here? Is it the tribal politics that keeps that from happening? Because I'm imagining if I'm in Pakistan and I'm a member of one of these tribes, I am probably not likely to want to be like India or want to be like Afghanistan, where the U.S. has been there. I probably don't feel like I'm aligning myself with people I like. Is that true?
Not on this area. It's not the tribes. It's basically the Pakistani military and
Is that
some
right?
elements of the military and some civilians. Because Pakistani civil society is quite open to this. At least the progressive ones open to trade. They want to trade, but then India has offered them a MFN status, most favored nation status, but they are very reluctant to return that, by arguing that India will take over our companies,
Right.
etc. But that is just a fear, because they really need things from India, electricity for instance. They are running short of electricity. They can have, once they start a trade, they can have a lot of peace also could follow trade,
Indeed.
And this is what is missing there. They think that once you have peace, then you can trade, but that
It's the other way around.
it may be the other way, because they're using coercive methods to achieve peace, and it's not working. But that learning hasn't taken place. And you need an economically oriented elite, a group, to think that peace can be achieved through economics rather than through military means.
Global trade seems to be the answer, getting us to know each other
Great,
better,
yes.
getting us to have those interactions,
I think so.
and continuing to all benefit from it
Yes.
would be a great thing.
Right.
Well, this is going to be an interesting talk tonight. You'll be at the, speaking with the Utah Council for Citizen Diplomacy at Westminster College this evening.
Right.
And I wanted to thank you again for coming in and spending some time. I'm intrigued to hear more. I can't wait to hear more this evening. Thank you so very, very
Thank
much
you.
for coming.
Absolutely.
Such a long
Thank you
ways
very
to
much.
be with us.
Pleasure.
All right. Dr. TV Paul, again, the book is The Warrior State. We will be back with more right here on the Mountain Morning Show after these commercial messages.